So, Berto, I have some emails from listeners and patrons that they have for us to answer. What do you say we answer those questions? Berto.
I would love it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Humberto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I repair broken elevator buttons.
This first email is from upper tier patron Kathleen. She always has great questions for us, very short questions. If you could change 3 things about this country, what would you change, Berto? 3 things.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I wouldn't have known to say this one before recent times, but I would probably make it, reduce the power of the executive branch. That is one thing I would change. The second thing is I would make it a hell of a lot more modern, easy, and robust to vote. And the third thing is I would carve out 30% of our land and make a new country and invite some people to move to it. No, but
Pacifica, man, Pacifica.
Pacifica, yeah. No, but without doing that, actually, the other thing I would change is I would have a greater emphasis on teaching, on like the kind of education that happens in the lower grades and the middle grades, on teaching logic and critical reasoning. So
Interesting. So that's my number 1 education program on how to think critically and rationally, and
nice.
understand science. Now, I think I got an email from someone recently saying that they are a teacher and they do teach critical thinking, which I recognize, and I always
Love
say
it.
that whenever I rail against our education system, I will always try to say, I know there are programs out there are teachers who are doing good work, but clearly, on average, we are not doing enough. Number 2 is education program regarding attachment theory. I think our listeners wouldn't be surprised on that one. Universally, when people learn about attachment theory, when people become a patron of the podcast and listen to my, 10, 15-hour deep dive on attachment theory, and it's mind-blowing. And it's not my deep dive that's mind-blowing, it's the theory that's mind-blowing. The way it's taught in schools is so shallow. When you really internalize what is what they're talking about, evolutionary psychology-wise, all that kind of stuff, it really tells you why your life has sucked occasionally in relationships.
Wow.
And at work, and all these kinds of things. It's really mind-blowing. Number 3 is 1,000 times more funding in mental health services, which would be 3% of the military budget and the police budget. So there are we have people in our country who are middle class. I mean, I'm not even talking about poor people. I'm not talking about disadvantaged. I'm talking about privileged white middle class Americans who cannot find a good therapist. They can't find the right therapist for them. That is a crime. That's like, what? And a big part of that is funding. Then Kathleen also asks, what is the one thing you would do if you weren't afraid of anything? Berto, what would you do?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. So on the one hand, you would think, well, if I'm not afraid of anything, I would go to Mars.
Maybe. You can't go to Mars because that's not an option.
Well, or go to the moon or something. I guess I can't be an astronaut. So if it's something that I would have to be able to do and not be afraid of it, it really would come down to I would probably quit my job. I would quit my job because, elevators are becoming more and more important. It's true. But the modern systems, actually, those buttons last pretty long. So I would quit my job and live way, way, way under my means. Like, I would simplify my life dramatically. I would probably sell this nice microphone. You wouldn't be able to podcast with me. And all I would do is practice martial arts for the rest of my life.
Really?
I don't know. It's too extreme, probably. I mean, not really. Not to that extreme.
Is that a fantasy of yours? I mean, is this something you go to in your mind sometimes?
Well, the part that is true is that I do wish that I could be financially independent so that I could spend more time creating rather than just, working for a specific industry that is exciting. I mean, like, you never want those buttons not to work, man.
Yeah.
You never do.
So if you were unafraid, you'd take that leap and try to be financially independent and also scale back your spending just in case you don't make $1 billion from whatever idea you have.
That's right. And that's the key, because I actually was that brave in 2007, and I took that leap.
I know, I was there.
Right. It's just that I took a leap. Normally you're like, well, I see a square on the ground. It looks a little unstable, but I'm going to take a leap onto it. Instead, there was no square. And I'm like, I'm hoping there will be a square. Well, I'm just going to take the leap.
I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't know, but the way that I perceived it was you made a intelligent choice. You said, I want to go into business for myself, and I want to create things that the market wants. And I have the background. The market is kind of wide open at this point, and I have people that I know who can help me to, get there. Yeah. And I have enough funds available in my life that I can do this for a span of time without suffering too bad. Yeah. So it wasn't a stupid choice, and you had some success in that. You weren't like complete failure, and you worked really hard, And
I worked really hard.
Yeah.
There were some things working against me. It was right before the big crash in 2008. It was, kind of, and I put trust in some people, and they really defrauded that trust. But you're right. So I can't look at. So I'm not saying it's not so much that like I've always been afraid. It's really more about maybe having that courage again. Rekindling that courage.
For me, I can't think of anything because there's really nothing. Because I tend to do things that make me afraid. Yeah. like busking at Pike Place Market or. These kinds of things. Doing our live show, our first live show, was terrifying to me. Yeah. Afterwards, if I would have known what it entailed, our live show, I probably never would have signed up for it. But afterwards, I was reflecting back, and I thought, we basically designed a stand-up comedy show, the two of us, and entertained people for like an hour and a half. Yeah. With lots of laughter and information. And if someone would have said, yeah, Kirk, do you think it's wise that you try to, take a dabble in stand-up comedy with your friend Humberto for an hour and a half in front of a bunch of strangers, I would have said no. Now, a lot of you listeners were there, by the way. Yeah. Emily, Mayate, who else was there that first? Well, a lot of my, close colleagues like Aaron and Christy and Jessamy and them. Anyway, the point is, it's an amazing show, and it was one of the most memorable moments of my life.
It was so fun to do, man.
But when someone asks me, what's one thing you would do if you weren't afraid of anything, the only thing that really comes to mind is like skydiving, I guess. But honestly, if I really wanted to skydive, I'd do it. But I don't really care to. It's not really something that I'm dying to do,
Well, and it's also weird because the part that is funny when you say that you wouldn't be afraid of anything, because
it implies that you're not doing something right now because you're afraid of it.
Absolutely, and it also implies, like for example, like I would finally eat puffer fish or whatever that fish is that can be poisonous, right? Yeah. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess you could call it being afraid. It's just I just don't want to get sick and die.
Right. I think you and I are not those kinds of people. Like, we don't shy away from things because of fear, right? Like we shy away of things because of good decision making, if you will.
Yeah. If anything, I'd say there's been a little too much risk taking in my life at times. That was a lack of wisdom. So, but the fear wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are a lot of people out there, if you ask them this question, and I encourage everyone listening to think about that. What's one thing you would do if you weren't afraid of anything?
Right.
There's a lot of people out there that'd be like, well, I'd join a band, or I'd start a podcast, or I would go to graduate school, or I would get that sweet cherry job at that elevator company. You know, these are things that you and I just do, you know. Now, we have our other faults, but...
Oh, you just hit on it, though.
What?
All right. Well, because you would probably point this out to me. All right, I'll finish my CD.
I mean, yeah, right. So that, you know, I perceive, and I think you've said, that the reason why you haven't finished your piano music CD is because you're afraid of failure. You're afraid of it sounding like shite because you've spent so much time on it. Yeah. But it's like, don't be afraid. Just, you know, you don't want to die with that thing still on a master tape somewhere. Anonymous patron asked a number of questions here that I thought I would ask you, Berto. New ideas on what to teach elementary school kids in music. So this anonymous patron has a lot of music questions. So what would you teach elementary school kids? So, you know, third graders, fourth graders in music. What would you do, Berto?
Okay, so I would teach a couple things that I found as I grew up I didn't know, but then when I learned them as an adult, basically, they were so helpful. And you could have learned them as a kid. Sorry.
As a songwriter or something?
Well, as a songwriter and as a person who played in bands and things like that, yes, absolutely. So one of them is, as a kid, and I think maybe this is different, you know, you might go to some schools that do this in general. But if you think about it, a lot of times parents put their kids in piano lessons or violin lessons and things like this. And what they learn is they learn that instrument and they learn to sight read, and it's all very valuable. And if they start early enough, oh man, they got the skills, right? No question about it. But what's funny is that a lot of times I see they don't learn like the meta story, like what's going on here. They just know like the particulars of that instrument and the notes on the paper. But even easier to learn is like some basic chord sequences, and the idea of chords in the first place. And that was something like when I was taking piano lessons in high school, we didn't get to chords like forever. It was when I got music theory that I started learning chords. But even then, it was like classical music theory. So the concept of chords was all about voice leading and how do you arrange the notes. But there's so many tools that if you like study the Beatles on your own, you'll learn them implicitly, right? But you can give these things to kids. So you can be like, here, we're going to give you some general tools, how to write basic little songs. You know, there's a thing called the one chord, and it sounds like this. It's major. And then you teach them like these little basic building blocks. And forget about the difficulty of playing the instrument. Just give them a one button press for the chord. That's one thing. And then the second thing that I also found really useful, but I didn't learn it as a kid, is rhythm. Just how to have rhythm. And that means, like, forget the particulars of playing the instrument. You could clap, you could just hit a table, whatever it is, but just learn different rhythms. I happen to have good rhythm naturally somehow, but I never really knew about rhythms until I was in college, you know?
Yeah.
So anyways, those are two things I would...
Yeah, I have a similar thing, but the main thing that I was thinking was just have fun with music. And you pointed out the way we typically will teach music to kids, which is lessons, which is essentially like the most boring version of learning music.
Yeah.
For me
with
today,
a ruler, ta ta ta.
Yeah, for me today, I wouldn't want to do that as an adult. You know, take like lessons. Now there's beauty in that, and some people love it, but the average person, including children, they just want to have fun. They just want to get into it and like make noise and express themselves. And I know that music teachers do this. I remember doing this a little bit when I was a kid in music classes, but a lot of it was that theory stuff, and it was just boring. Music therapists out there, I know you're out there. You do this stuff all the time. You just give adults, older adults, kids, tambourines, ukuleles, flutes, and you just say, okay, here's the fundamentals. Now let's do this rhythm, and just do whatever you want, make stuff up.
Right.
And to see people thrive in that space is just wonderful. And then you build on that, right? You say, okay, well, now that we've messed around with these, everyone has taken a turn on these 10 different instruments. Now I'm going to teach you how to write a song. and you do that, and maybe you just write a song with a drum, like gut 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 gut. I love bananas, gut 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 gut. I love strawberries too, gut 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 gut. Like just.
Oh, you just hit it on the head. I guess actually that's my new number one. Forget everything else. They don't teach you how to songwrite.
Dead space, Berto.
Well, you didn't react to my statement.
I don't know what you're saying. What were you saying?
They don't teach you how to songwrite.
Oh, So I thought you meant, my idea is they don't teach you how to teach songwriting. Literally, like, my idea is to not teach people to songwrite.
Oh, I see. No. What I mean is, if you think about it, you learn how to play the piano.
That's not an idea. Yeah. That was your point. That wasn't your idea. Your point was they don't teach you songwriting.
Well, because I got it because you were just talking about how like, oh, and now we're gonna write this song and stuff. And then I just realized that was missing.
Yeah.
You don't get taught how to write a song.
Right. And, this is common for, at least when we were growing up, the way education is. It's about getting in line, doing what you're told, and don't express yourself,
Yeah.
Because when kids express themselves, then God knows what's going to happen. And there are certain fundamentals that you have to learn. And so it just falls in line. Next question from an anonymous patron. How to stop self-sabotage as a musician? How to stop self-sabotage. So I'm guessing what anonymous patron is talking about is like you self-sabotage with your CD with piano music. You could say that you've self-sabotaged yourself, or you I don't know, you sell your favorite guitar in a spasm of upsettedness or something.
Well, or you've pointed this out before, like when we were working on our album, the Missionary album, I would often want to rewrite a part or rewrite the song again, or like, kind of revisit over and over. And some of that is fine. It's, you're editing, you're improving and stuff. But I think you had pointed out to me a few times like that sometimes you need to be okay with moving on to the next thing.
Right.
And that can be another way to sabotage yourself, both in songwriting and in other kinds of art, where you're just never done with the thing.
Right.
And you just keep going with it.
So how do you stop that, Berto? I
have found one tool, which is actually be less precious about everything. Because when you're starting out, and I say starting out, but really most of my adult life, you have this concept of like, oh, I'm going to write that hit single. This is going to be the ticket, the golden ticket. And so every song you approach it like that. Now, from the one hand, that's great, because then you're hopefully going to be making better quality songs because you're really putting your all into it. But the flip side of it is you're putting so much weight on that one song. And this can be a roadblock for when you're writing a book or when you're doing any sort of productive work in general, is that if you make it too precious, then, oh my gosh, you're scared to touch it or even work on it, because what if it's not living up to the glorious dream you have of it? Whereas if it's like, okay, well, here's another song, I'm going to finish it. And then, and here's another song, or here's another chapter, or here's another thing and they're fine. Like, I don't mean like, don't put emphasis into it or don't be meticulous and detail oriented, but just don't treat everything like it's your masterpiece and people will bow.
Yeah. And this is good advice for any creative person, like you're writing your book, it's a similar thing. It's like, what if my novel isn't as, Pulitzer Prize worthy as I was hoping it would be? And it's like, well, if every writer thought that, there'd be nothing written down. So my advice to people who self-sabotage as a musician is just do it. That's kind of what Berto's saying, but a different version. And when I say just do it, I mean just stop thinking. Like, you're on this planet once, and like I said to Berto, do you want to die with this CD on master tape? You people out there, you get one chance on this planet. Do you want to die having been like, well, I always wanted to do it, but I don't want, all of us right now listening, and me and Berto included, in 100 years, we're all dead. All of us are dead, buried under the ground. cremated, lost at sea, something.
Living forever as an AI, right?
We're gone. And in another 100 years, anyone who remembered us, also dead and gone. No one will remember us. Nothing will matter. So what are you waiting for? Like, that's the way I always think about this stuff. It's just like, if I have one life on this planet, I'm going to fucking entertain myself. Like, this is going to be my life, and I'm not going to make it anyone else's life. And if that means making a lot of mistakes, which I have done, then that's what it means. Because worst case scenario, in 200 years, whether I made a brilliant piece of art or completely messed it up, no one will remember or remember the people who remembered. So just do it. The other thing is do it because you love it as a musician. A lot of people will want to get into music for other sorts of reasons. And the thing that I've found, and this is true for you, Berto, that I observe in you, is if you love something enough, you just do it. People will say, I never had the time to learn piano. I never had the time to learn, guitar. Neither did I. It's not like I was, just given years of free time. I didn't have time either, but I loved music and still do. Like, on my left is my guitar, on my right is my keyboard. And, the other day I was just like, I want to learn how to play Say Yes by Elliott Smith. And I sat down and learned it. It's not like I had extra time. There's always things hanging over my head. So the thing that I'll say is find what you love and do that. Don't do things that you think you're supposed to do. If you think you're supposed to be like the next EDM star because that's the sort of music you like, but your heart isn't into it, you're not going to do it. Whereas if you just like playing in a cover band as a second-rate drummer, then do that. Do what you love. Don't do anything else. The other thing is do not get bogged down in gear. This is a problem for a lot of musicians, you included, Berto.
I'm raising my hand on this one.
Getting bogged down in gear, like where there's been, and I am guilty of it at times as well, where it's like, if I only had that one piece of gear, then I could really be creative. And so I'm saving up to get that piece of gear. I've been recording music since I was 16, 17 years old. And when I first started recording, I had a $100 computer or $100 guitar that I bought from an Army surplus store. And I had 2 boom boxes. Yeah. And I had a Casio sampling keyboard that was like the size of a big phone, essentially. And I wrote some beautiful songs back then. And I had no gear. Everyone has a billion times more gear on their iPhone right now. So you don't need the gear. Now, gear can help, but don't wait, just create. The other thing is work with other people. Because for me, my best moments in music have been working with other people.
Yeah.
There's something
well,
about...
I'd say that one, yeah.
There's something about, like, it's greater than the sum of its parts. Like, when you bring people together, it gives it energy and more creativity and motivation and a responsibility to the team. If it's just you're like, well, I got other things to do. If people depend on you, you got to show up to band practice, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I'd add to that to say, don't sell yourself short, meaning find people that are not only willing to play with you, that you want to play with, but actually people that are better than you at some stuff, or that you complement each other. Don't just find people that are sort of like willing to go along with it, because that won't push you. As an example, I think like when you and I were playing together, it really pushed me because you weren't just like some like for-hire guitarist that joined my band and you're kind of like rolling your eyes as you're playing my music, and you were in it. You were writing your own songs too, and we're both like playing each other's songs, and we liked figuring out what harmonies we were going to do, and then we recorded that CD, and that really pushed me. I don't think, in fact, I know I wouldn't have had an album done if it had been just me. You would have, but I wouldn't have. And that was really important. But it was not just that I was doing it with someone else. I was doing it with someone else that that was that I could learn from, not just someone that I could tell what to do.
I will say those are rare relationships. I've had, just 3 or 4 relationships like the one you and I had. It's hard to find people who are similarly sort of motivated and matched up for that. The last advice I have to combat self-sabotage is find your voice. So for me, I didn't really know what my voice was when I first started working in music. I wanted to be famous when I was a teenager. And so I was looking to figure out what was popular and what I could do within popular music. And at times that was okay, and other times it was disastrous, particularly when we went into the grunge years, which my voice is not geared towards grunge music. But there's a whole couple of years of songs that I wrote during that time that are just awful. They're terrible songs, and I thought they were good. And I was basically trying to write Pearl Jam songs or Nirvana songs.
Sure.
My Smashing Pumpkins style songs were actually okay, but my Pearl Jam and Nirvana songs, particularly my Pearl Jam songs, were terrible. And later on, actually when I discovered Elliott Smith in the mid-90s, was when I was like, oh, wait, so I can be soft and subtle and along those lines, like, oh, okay, I think I'll do that. Or like stuff like the Strokes is more kind of subtle as well. Anyway, the point is that when you find your voice, one, you just feel more in the groove. But 2, you don't feel like you're grading up against a style that you're trying to be that isn't really you. And just be yourself. And if people don't like it, screw them. But they probably will. If you find who you are as a musician or an artist of any kind, and you do that because it's in your bones and it fits who you are and your personality, then people will like it a lot more than if you're trying to act like something else.
Yeah, I think finding your voice is super important. There's no question about it.
Mickey Mouse, be quiet.
No, but listen, in all seriousness, I think, well, and you can, like, the voice part, it can apply in different ways. For example, you may find that what you're really good at and what you enjoy doing is writing very poppy songs for other people to sing or something. Like, there are people that's their talent. They come up with, when they get paid, how, most of us are like, oh, maybe I could write a song that could maybe someday be a hit single. These people write hit singles for breakfast. And they get paid because it's a guarantee. Like, hey, listen, we have a movie coming out. In that movie, there needs to be a song in the middle of the movie that's got to sound like an absolute pop single. We need you to write it. Oh, sure, yeah, I charge the standard amount because that's what I do. That's my voice. And that's what they do. So your voice doesn't have to be like a Bob Dylan voice or this and that. And it doesn't even have to be that you are the best guitarist or the best pianist. But finding what it is that you're both that good at and enjoy, that is key. And I totally agree with that. I've definitely been tricked many times in my past where, I have this friend that would always point out like how there was this other music that he liked. And I would be like trying to impress him. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to try to write music like that. Man, that never works out. Never works out. So yeah, I think couldn't agree more. Try to find your voice.
Last question from anonymous patron along these lines is, anything interesting new about the music scene where you live? Berto, what do you think?
I live in my house.
Yeah.
The new music scene is whatever music I'm recording. No, but honestly, even before this pandemic, I am so out of the touch. I'm so out of the touch that I don't even know the saying.
Yeah.
That's how so out of the touch I am.
I'm more into the touch than you are, Berto. Before the virus, particularly like up until a few years ago, I went out all the time and went to a lot of, because there's so many music venues in Seattle. I mean, one of my favorite things to do would be just like, okay, Friday night, I'm just going to go out by myself. I'm just going to go, I'm going to go to 5 different clubs. I'm going to go to Crocodile, Rendezvous, all the different places in Belltown, or I'm going to go on Capitol Hill or whatever. And I just love, because there is so much good music in Seattle. I mean, it's just amazing, the variety and the personalities that you see. So the things that, from my perspective, what I saw in Seattle is that alternative rock, whatever you want to call it, is still thriving in Seattle. There is a lot of what I would characterize as alternative rock. There's a lot of alternative hip hop as well. There's a lot of underground EDM, alternative. Basically, everything in Seattle is alternative. You got some alternative country, alternative EDM, alternative rock. So in Seattle, because the music scene in Seattle was discovered by the world, with Nirvana and everyone else. And so there's a lot of really big bands that came out of Seattle, Soundgarden, these other kind of acts. And then there was Death Cab for Cutie and, Postal Service, these kinds of bands. But then everything kind of died off. A Band of Horses was kind of big for a while. But in the past 10, 15 years, there really hasn't been a big Seattle act other than what's her face? Carlisle. What's her name? But anyway, Seattle now has gone back, in my estimation, to the way it was in the 80s. But there's a lot more venues. Like in the 80s, no one respected local music. But today in Seattle, there's a lot of respect for local music. But the vibe of local music is none of us are going to make it. You know what I mean? We don't live in LA. We don't live in London. We don't live in New York. And so people are seemingly expressing who they are without trying to be something else,
Right.
Which ends up being really cool.
That's awesome.
The other thing that I'm seeing is a lot of good cover bands. In the 90s when I would go out and see a lot of music back then, I remember cover bands were it was old people playing funk music or something, like 60s music. And there were some famous cover bands in Seattle back then, but I remember, I think maybe 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I went to LA and I went to the Rainbow Room, which is a famous place. And they have a venue upstairs. And in this tiny little room, I saw the best Led Zeppelin cover band I've ever seen in my life.
What?
And there were 2 people watching them. And I thought, LA has such a, robust talent source that these 4 guys are playing Led Zeppelin perfectly, and they look good too. They had, the lead singer looked like a real rock star in all the ways that you would imagine. And 2 people were watching, and I just thought, man, LA is different from Seattle, because Seattle would not have this sort of band, right?
Right.
But I think that's starting to happen in Seattle. I think there are more of those kinds of really, really awesome cover bands. And my band was along those lines. We became a very good, in my estimation, Strokes cover band, and really dedicated ourselves to playing just the Strokes,
Yeah.
And
you guys sounded great.
At times. I think I was the worst. I think I was the worst part of the...
You had some very strong musicians in that band. Man.
Yeah, I was
a super band.
I was the weakest link.
You did great. I really enjoyed your shows.
Thanks. And then, of course, we have the Black Tones, which is a friend of mine. If you want to Google them, Black Tones from Seattle. Friends of mine in the band, particularly Cedric, the drummer. He's a really good friend of mine. And they are up and coming, or they've already arrived in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They recently did a show with Dave Matthews and Macklemore and stuff as a Seattle COVID, kind of thing. And so I'll mention them, but I will say that there's just a lot of alternative music in Seattle. And I love it all. I think it just feels Seattle to me. Even the alternative country just feels very Seattle to me.
Yeah, it definitely feels healthier right now than, because the last time I was really playing out a lot, it was all the way back in 2005. I was playing, I think I've mentioned to you, I was playing 3, sometimes 4 shows a week.
Yeah.
Traveling.
You had
all
a
over the place.
customized band van.
Yeah. We were going all the way down to Olympia and Portland and all the
Do
way
you
up
still
to
have that van, by the way?
Bellingham. Yeah, I still do. It's collecting rust. I really need to fix it. But at the time, bands, I got this feeling like we were treated fairly poorly. Not just us. I mean, I just felt like bands were like a dime a dozen. It was like,
Yeah.
sure, you can play. And I didn't
Like
see a lot
had
of...
to, like I played in bands back then too, and you really had to beg people to
Yeah,
let you play there.
exactly.
Yeah, it's not that way so much anymore.
And there was a ton of, most of the bands, like we stuck out a little bit because we were writing sort of more traditional songs, and a lot of the bands were metal bands. There was a lot of metal at the time.
Right. Yeah, so let's take a break, and when we get back, let's continue with emails for you and me, Berto. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, Berto, if an early 90s grunge band were to ask everyone to become a patron of the podcast, what would that sound like?
An early 90s grunge band. Okay, it'd be like, so, thank you for, like, listening to us or whatever. But, I don't know, man. Like, if you feel like it, you could become a patron, but I don't want to tell you what to do because, like, F the system. So actually, you probably don't want to do it. Honestly, we suck, like everything we do sucks. But that's life, man. Life just sucks. So whatevs. But they say whatevs, they probably wouldn't say whatevs.
No, that's a more thing. They would say whatever for sure.
Whatever.
Patron Elena from London, she says she asks us, what are our favorite podcasts? And of course, whenever we get asked this question, I always have to say, for you, Berto, maybe YouTube channels.
YouTube channels. Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. Well, so my tastes have changed a bit in the last bit of time. I will still mention Philip DeFranco, SXE Phil. For years, I listened to him constantly. Recently, not as much. Nothing he's doing differently. Just I've been into different things recently. So I've been watching a ton of videos on writing and how to write and how to create characters and how to create story. A ton of channels some of them are actual writers, some of them are like agents, like literary agents, and some of them are teachers, like they teach in famous universities in California and stuff like this. I'm addicted to those. And the other stuff that is sort of evergreen for me is anything that's math or science related. So, 60 Symbols is a constant channel for me. There's one that is, what's it called? Oh man, I'm spacing, but it's Veritasium.
Yeah, Veritasium.
Yeah, that one's really good.
Yeah, I love that.
And then I really love watching debates for some reason. Well, you could probably imagine because I like talking, and so I like hearing people talk. But I love debates on religion, debates on economics and stuff like this. For a while, I was really addicted to listening to all of the Bible analysis, the Jordan Peterson Bible analysis, because I was just like, I just wanted to hear what all the connections he was making, because in spite of how I feel about it and how I feel about him, like he's very literary about that aspect. So, of course, he had some health problems and stuff, so he hasn't been posting anything in quite a while.
Jordan Peterson?
Jordan Peterson, yeah. He
has
had
health problems?
Oh, yeah. He was addicted to benzos, I guess, or whatever. And he
really
nearly died. He had to go to Russia for some detox program, and he's been just recently came back into the he did a video with his daughter talking about it and stuff.
Huh.
Like that. Yeah.
I didn't know that. His wife was sick too, wasn't his wife sick or something? Anyway.
Oh yeah, his wife. That's kind of one of the reasons he got into these problems, is because he was dealing with his wife's illness and getting really depressed and all these kinds of things. Yeah, it's really interesting because, well, anyway, so there's that. And then I always like listening to some news stuff like the Young Turks and David Pakman show, Rachel Maddow, those kinds of things.
For me, I actually will provide podcasts, which are available on your phone, right? My favorite currently is the Anthropocene Reviewed, which you might know from YouTube as John Green, the Green brothers.
Yeah.
And this is just amazing podcasting. Essentially what he does is, and it's scripted, but he reads it very fluidly. It's not just him rambling like you and me. He writes, because he's an excellent writer, and he writes this all out, and he always reviews 2 things every episode. It's like, 20 minutes episode. So he's like Yelp reviewing things in society. Like he'll review hot dogs or politics or the ozone layer or COVID. He'll rate that on a scale from 1 to 5, and he'll talk about it. But I can't do it justice. The way he weaves in things. I mean, I've cried, I've laughed. I mean, it's just so amazing the way that he talks about things, and he self-discloses a lot. It's really amazing.
I'm gonna have to listen to this.
Yeah, Anthropocene Reviewed, highly recommend. Dan Carlin, his history podcast, I always talk about that. He really goes into history a lot. Just love that. TBTL, Too Beautiful to Live, which is just 2 guys talking in Seattle. I've always loved that podcast. I've talked about Friendly Fire, which is 3 guys in Seattle, or at least 2 of them are in Seattle, talking about war movies. I've really have fallen in love with that podcast.
Wow.
The Conan O'Brien podcast is amazing. Not every episode is amazing, but it is. Conan O'Brien is. I love him so much now that I bought a Lego figure of him that's behind me right now.
What? That's awesome.
I mean, he is just a national treasure. He's just so great.
Yeah, he's amazing.
The podcast Heavyweight with Jonathan Goldstein, which if you're familiar with him from This American Life, it's an amazing podcast. Reply All, which is a pretty popular podcast where they do a lot of tech stuff, but they do it in this really hilarious way. Like one episode, so these 2 guys, and one of the guys decides, okay, I'm going to try to hack in to the other guy's phone. So then he goes on this journey where he starts talking to hackers about how do I hack into my friend's phone, and then he proceeds to do it, and then he will show him his results later on and be like, okay, so I've been working on this project, and I hacked into your phone like a month ago, and I've been recording.
Oh my God.
I've been recording everything you've been doing, and then they proceed to talk about like how do you hack into a phone, how do you protect yourself from that, and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is one of the very first podcasts I ever listened to, and really was a major motivation for me to becoming a podcaster, was listening to that in 2006.
I just realized I did a disservice too. I really want to call out some specific channels that I subscribe to. I mentioned a couple, but I do want to mention a couple more. So there's one called Davey504. Have you watched this guy?
No.
He is an amazing bass player, but his channel is all like this joke channel where he's always, poo-pooing everyone else and insulting people, and he has all these fights he gets into with other musicians and stuff. But then whenever he plays bass, like he's an amazing bassist, an amazing musician. It's really funny. Then Two Set Violin, another music channel. These 2 Asians, I think they're Korean, and they're amazing violinists. And they actually got into a back and forth with this Davey504 guy, because the Davey504 guy put down the violin, and then these guys are like, oh, that won't stand. And so they went back and forth in a few videos. I also listened to, so I was talking about books and stuff, but I also listen to MMA stuff. So that one is called MMA World, where I watch all the highlights from MMA fights and things like that. Computer File, which is like Number File, which I also listen to. I love the Screen Rant channel, especially the any of them that are the pitch ones, where it's like he's pitching, like, here's how I've got this new movie for you. It's just so great. I mentioned 60 Symbols. Forgot to mention number 5, but I just did. Then there's this writer advice person named K.M. Weiland. She's this gal, and she's got this channel. It doesn't have a lot of views for some reason, but her advice and advice on characters and structure is just so amazing. Love it, love it. And last couple, there's one called Dr. Mix. Have you seen this one?
Yeah. I love Dr. Mix.
I think you might have been the one who pointed me to it.
Yeah,
because you sent me a couple things.
I think he's like maybe Dutch or German or something, and he is a master studio music producer, and he's got a wonderful personality.
Yes,
and he'll like I might have sent you this one where he recreated the Knight Rider theme song.
That's the one. Yeah. So anyway, so that's great. And then I got some on comics, variant comics. You mentioned John Green, the Vlog Brothers. I've been, I don't know, 12 years on that channel or something. Something crazy. So yeah, and then I have some vegan stuff and whatnot, but I didn't realize just how many subscriptions I have. I've got too many subscriptions.
Yeah, I was just looking at my YouTube, just curious too. I have like hundreds of subscriptions on YouTube.
It's crazy.
Debbie sent in a article months and months ago and wanted us to talk about it. So I'm just going to read highlights from this article. This is called, the title of this article is called Massachusetts Serial Pooper Busted for Defecating in Parking Lot 8 Times by Natalie O'Neill. So I'm just going to read some excerpts here. A Massachusetts woman was busted for allegedly turning a store parking lot into her own personal potty, pooping there a staggering 8 times in roughly a month. Dubbed the parking lot pooper, Andrea Grosser, 51, of Ashland, was allegedly caught dropping trow near the Natick outdoor store. Quote, at first, workers thought it was an animal, but then they noticed toilet paper and other wipes. When confronted, she told the officer she had irritable bowel syndrome and was on her way to her job as a nanny. The cop pointed out that there were plenty of public restrooms nearby. The officer also called her employer, who confirmed she could have just pooped at their house, so where she was nannying. She was charged with wanton destruction of property and released without bail. Berto, what do you think about this story?
Wow. Well, I mean, I guess it's the repeat part that, because, you know, there are people with IBS and that can be a real emergency. Although I would imagine you would try to find a more hidden place or something. But man, I know what it feels like when you gotta go, you know?
Has that ever happened to you before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I think I've told this story, like we've said before. I'm sure I've told this story. I was in high school and I had a cross-country match. It was a 3-mile run. And it was like, you know, right after school or whatever.
Oh, God.
And so I decided that it was a great idea to go to the 7-Eleven and buy a 12-inch hoagie sandwich basically an hour before the run. And I ate this humongous, again, 12-inch with like the salamis and the cheeses and the sauce that was slightly spicy and stuff. And I just crammed this whole thing down my gullet. And then I started running. Oh my God, dude. I think I ran probably 250 yards and my stomach all of a sudden started going. And I was like, oh God, I gotta go right now. And you know, when you're running, you're wearing these teeny little shorts and stuff. So I'm like, I'm screwed. Like, what am I gonna do? I mean, I feel like I need to go literally the second. So what I did is I dashed off the route. Everyone's running. We're just at the start of the race. So everyone's going super fast and everyone's together. And I dart off to the side and like my teammates are like, where are you going? I'm like, I got to do something. And I go into the bushes up the hill as far as I could get, just in the middle of the bushes. And I crouch down and I just got to let it all go. And it was so bad. And I had to sit there. I was stuck. I'm wearing like, I have no toilet paper. I have nothing. And it's like bad. And I'm sitting there with my little blue teeny shorts around my ankles. And I'm like,
dude, sock.
In the bushes.
Dude,
and
sock.
I'm like, what? I should have thought of the socks, dude. And I'm sitting there. I'm like, what am I going to do? So what I ended up doing is we were luckily running around a lake. when everyone had passed and I waited, but I probably waited there, honestly, like half an hour or something. Or I don't know, it felt like half an hour. It was probably 10 minutes, but I crept as quickly as I could down the bushes and made a dash for the lake. And I just went into the lake. And I just was in the lake for like 10 minutes.
With all your clothes?
Yeah, well, with my running gear, you know.
What were your shorts at your knees or were they up?
No, I mean I pulled them up, so I'm sure they got soiled in the process, and it was
what'd you tell people when you got to the finish line?
Oh, where were you? What happened to you? I'm like, oh, I just didn't feel good. I had to jump into the lake. I felt it was heat exhaustion, and luckily no one, maybe someone knew, but no one was like, "What are you talking about, Mr. Poopy Pants?"
Oh God, that's great.
Oh, it was so embarrassing. So
this is a thing, and Debbie, I think, sent this in because there are a lot of these stories of people who will repeatedly poop in public and get caught. There was a principal a couple years ago who got caught pooping at a rival school's track because he would run around the other school's track in the morning before school.
Oh my gosh.
I think every day, not just every once in a while, every day.
Oh my God.
He would go number 2, like, on the field somewhere. And
that's all sorts of wrong.
So there's all these questions as to like, well, why is this? And the answer I'll say, the short answer is, it's impossible to know without assessing them. And I obviously, well, not obviously, but I don't specialize in this kind of client, so I don't really know, and I haven't looked up the research. But I will say that there are things that come to mind that are speculative, is that they get a physical and or emotional pleasure from pooping in public. And this is somewhat normal in that it just feels good to poop, right? I mean, let's all admit it. It's like, when it makes sense that we would have an emotional evolutionary thing of you have buildup and it feels bad. Get it out. And then when you get it out, your brain rewards you with all these endorphins of like, good job, you just did something you're supposed to do. In the same way that when you eat something, you also get a euphoric feeling as well.
Can you imagine if pooping felt as good as having an orgasm?
I think for some people it does. And that's my point, is like for some people, I think it feels so good that they...
Oh, here it comes. Oh
yeah. And as with sexual activity, some people have fetishes about doing it in public. And so, almost getting caught, or the exhibitionist nature of it. Yeah. And so I think it is definitely possible that some of these people have a condition, a fetish of getting sexual pleasure or something like that. Another possibility is that these people have issues with their personality, maybe passive-aggressive personality, and they feel a compulsion to get back at other people in a pathological manner, which can manifest in a lot of behaviors, including taking a crap in someone's yard. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, there are people that do all sorts of things passively as a way of getting, a lot of people have aggression going on, and if you don't feel like you can express that in a healthy way, then, you'll do it in a hidden way. And of the million different hidden ways you can express aggression, pooping is one. Another possibility is that for some people, they might only be able to go in certain situations, in the same way that some people might only be able to go number 2 in their own house and in their own toilet. Yeah. Some people might only be able to go in nature, because your body might just sort of associate. If you start a habit of going to the bathroom every day at 7:30 when you're at this particular spot, then your body might just be like, well, this is where we go. Because your body doesn't know it's wrong and against the law. It's just like, well, this is where we go. Right. And the person might at home be trying to go, but then they're just like, it's not happening. I bet I have to go on my run to kind of jog it loose, if you will. And there you go. Another possibility is that some people just have actual beef. They're just angry in that passive aggressive way. Another is mental illness. I mean, you could be psychotic. You could suffer from dementia, schizophrenia, and I've never heard of it before, but I could imagine psychosis manifesting in like, well, I have to go poop in this parking lot or else the aliens are going to get me, that kind of thing.
Ooh,
so those are
like the probes in my butt.
Yeah, it's sort of different. So that is my speculation to that. And I find that a lot of people, when they talk about these stories in the news, there's a lot of bewilderment. It's like, well, why would someone do that? Is it just like bad behavior? I think a lot of people will frame it as if it's like littering. Like, how some people litter. It's like, oh, come on,
You shouldn't
people.
litter in public.
You should. But I think there's something more going on with some of these people. Upper tier patron Kathleen always has great questions for us. And she asks, after waking up your phone, she has a hypothetical. After waking up, your phone sends you an alert that due to a massive meteorite, the world is going to end in 12 hours. What do you do? So you wake up in the morning, your phone sends you like an Amber alert. I don't know what sort of type of alert it would be. It says a meteorite is a meteor, asteroid is going to blow up the planet. You got 12 hours. What do you do, Berto?
Well, after probably throwing up a bit, double checking that it's not spam. Man, that's not happy. I mean, I would just spend it with my closest ones. I'd get on video calls right away. Maybe try to do a huge group call with my family, reminisce, play some music, drink heavily, and then
wait for the end again.
Wait for the end.
Yeah, when she
play music.
At first, when mine is exactly like yours, just identical. I hope maybe we'd be in the same room. Honestly,
I would hope we'd be in the call because you have to say goodbye to my family in Colombia too.
Yeah,
and I should say bye to your family.
And when I first read this question, I was like, oh, it's one of those thought experiments. But with COVID going on, it kind of hits home.
Ugh, yes, it does.
It kind of hits home. The only thing I would add, which was the very first thing I thought of, was eat all the food I like to eat.
Sure.
Patron Cody from England, she writes, I'm really interested in how people respond to fictional characters. I've noticed a lot of people, usually men, get angry at the idea that Ben Solo could have lived and sought atonement at the end of The Rise of Skywalker because he deserved to suffer and or die.
That's bullshit.
And I've also seen a lot of men want Kylo to be more evil and mock people who feel sorry. They've seen people who mock people who feel sorry for him or who relate to him in any way. I was wondering what your thoughts were on this. So basically, if you're not aware of this, Berto and I are very aware of this, is that there are people online that get really angry about certain, not only just movies and the way they depict your favorite character, but in the way people talk about it. So when I don't know if it was after episode 7 or 8 in Star Wars, people were starting to talk about how, there's all this fan fiction about Rey and Kylo. If you're not aware of Star Wars,
you know how angry I get over Reylo.
Yeah, it's just like the good guy and the bad guy, the good girl and the bad guy in the movie. There was speculation that maybe they would fall in love and actually get married, or they'd have some sort of romance. It'd be like if Darth Vader and, well, you can't say Princess Leia because that's his daughter, or what's another one? If Voldemort and Hermione, that'd be a pretty good.
Dude, it's worse. It's like if Hitler and Anne Frank get together.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So some people will just throw that out there as like, oh, I wonder if that would happen, and then other people will get real angry and say like, you are an idiot. You don't deserve to be on the internet. You're a terrible human being. And so patron Cody from England is going, what's up with those people? Berto, what's up with you?
I'm one of those people. I mean, maybe not to that extreme, but listen, you got to understand, for some of us, as I've talked about before, Star Wars wasn't just this one movie I saw when I was a kid or something. It was my reality for years. It was what I thought of when I thought of the future and fun and sci-fi and toys. It was just like everything to me. So, then I grow up and I go to see a movie and there's like poo-poos on my thing that I love. So I'm going to get a little, but the Reylo thing was a little bit, there was additional components to it because frankly, I don't care about those characters in the context of the old movies I loved. They're new characters. So fine. I'm open to where the narration's going to take us. What I was so upset about was that the place that people would go to is like, oh, of course this strong, independent woman should fall for this mass murdering, misogya and like organismistic, like nihilistic monster.
So I think most people would, relate on some level, not maybe to this specific, but why so angry? That's what
serious.
That's what she's asking. Is just like, people are just talking on the internet. Like, why? Like, that there's a lot of dudes on the internet that will go ballistic.
Yeah.
Like, they might dox someone because of this sort of thing.
Okay, that is an extreme. I will agree. I think because those folk don't have a lot of things that are maybe as real feeling. And so these things feel like the most real things. And so they put the kind of energy into these causes that at different times they might have put into fighting a war for freedom. Because if you think about it, they're probably the same age range of the types of people that would have fought in the wars. So when you watch Hamilton or read about the founding fathers, you're like, man, they're like, oh, we're gonna liberate our country and we're gonna stand up to these British people. That's how angry they were. They were going crazy. It's just that they were doing it for something that, in retrospect, we're like, well, that's a worthy cause. But in this case, these people don't have those worthy causes, and instead they still have these intense inner feelings about like fighting for something. And so then this becomes their reality, and they're like, oh, I will die on a hill if you do this to my beloved Kylo, which I don't even care about because these movies are garbage.
That is as good an answer as any, and I will stand by it as a speculation. Now, I will say that I can kind of relate because when I saw Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, I felt like one of those dudes, man. I was just disgusted with what I was watching, and I was in the minority. Like even with you, Berto, I
you were
was,
even further off the
yeah. I mean, pretty much, maybe 25 minutes into the movie, I was like, this movie is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, and it just got dumber and dumber and dumber in my eyes. Patron Garby from Canada, she writes, I have a question for Berto. I recently heard on one of your podcasts that Umberto moved to the United States when he was 15 years old. I moved from Brazil to Canada when I was 16, so I was interested to know what his experience was like. I was very shy all my life, but moving here at the age made me feel very isolated, like I was a weirdo. I was also bullied and ridiculed in high school because I didn't speak English. I'm 28 years old now, and I got over some of those feelings, but it was a very traumatic experience for me. What was it like for you, Berto?
Oh man, I am so sorry to hear that. That is really unfortunate. And it's like, I know it's stereotypical, but it's not the image I have of Canada. They seem so nice. Well, I have to say I actually got really lucky because, if anything, the environment that I was in Colombia was really heading in a wrong direction. For one thing, the violence that we were experiencing as a society was ridiculous, daily, constant, terrible. Second, I went to a school full of kind of entitled kids that were part of the elite. I wasn't one of them, but most of them were. And there was bullying at my school, and I saw like one of my classmates who was a bigger kid in our class, but 2 years older kids bullied him really badly, and for no reason that I could see, which is usually the case. I remember one time I had to basically at the end of the day, at the end of one of the semesters, run away constantly that afternoon because they were giving wedgies. They were handing wedgies out to kids, and I didn't want to get a freaking wedgie. So I was just like avoiding. When I moved up here, I was expecting Karate Kid, like I would move up here and essentially a gang of, 20-foot tall gringos would accost me constantly, and I would have to give them my lunch money because I had seen all the movies. I got lucky. I didn't. And I made friends really, really early that were good friends. I was in classes with people that on the surface should have bullied me. Like there was this one physics class I was in, although I guess it's a physics class, but they were one grade ahead of me, both of them in the football team. One of them, this huge white dude, like, and not only big, but when you would feel his arm, don't ask me why I was feeling his arm, but when you would feel his arm, it was like iron, like there was no give to his skin. And then, I remember like one of the first days in that class, he's like, "Oh, so you're Colombian, hey? Oh, Pablo Escobar, drugs." And the thing is, I was like, that's right, yeah. And since there was nowhere else for him to take the joke, he was like, "Oh, that's cool, man." And then, he just never like bullied me or anything. I just got lucky. I honestly just got lucky. But I was told
you say lucky, but I think also you are just uniquely prepared to deal with bullies and to take the wind out of their sails. Yeah, I mean, if you had a shred of your social skill in that area, but particularly as you do now, I'm sure that you easily could have been bullied if you didn't have that skill. I don't know where you got that skill, but because I've seen people bully you as an adult, and you will easily just judo that stuff and take all the power out of it, and then it's just gone, and then you turn it around.
That's a really good question. I don't know where I got it because it's not my dad, I don't think. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was circumstantial, like all the little inputs into my young system ended up giving me tools so you're right. It's not just luck. It's luck in that I had those tools, but I also wasn't look, if I had grown up in New York the whole time, I think it would have been really bad because as a child there, I was already experiencing, I was sexually molested. I was being bullied by a 7-year-old meaning a 2-year older kid in my school. Being bullied severely. I was thrown down a flight of stairs by this kid.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Like I was at an ice cream shop and like some teenagers knocked ice cream off my hands and stuff. Like these were the experiences I was having. Oh, I was dropped off by the mom that was babysitting me, dropped me off upstairs, 2 floors upstairs into a different family's house without my dad knowing. Because years later when I was like, "Hey, do you remember that family with that one kid?" And he's like, "No." I'm like, "Oh, but I would get dropped off there." I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." It was like, what? And that kid was 2 years older too. And he wasn't exactly bullying me, but he was sort of bullying me. He would tell me stuff that was higher than my age range and like also weird things. Like he would be like, "Oh, where do you take girls at your school to go make out with them?" and stuff like that. And I was 5 and I'm like, "Wait, what are you talking?" Anyways, it's weird stuff was happening already. And that was at the age of 5. So I think if I had stayed in New York, my life would have turned out quite differently. When I went back to Colombia, even in spite of all the things, I had a lot of family around me. So things were fairly good in that sense. And then when I moved to Tacoma to live with my mom, in spite of it being apparently a dangerous area at the time, and my high school was known for bad things apparently, I overall had a really good experience. I got in with good friends, a lot of them Asian. And, I just...
Yeah, I think another difference between you and Patron Garby is that you spoke English.
Oh, and I spoke English, of course.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, this is something that I find to be, for those of you who watch my reaction videos, Stephanie on 90 Day Fiancé, early in her life, she came from the Czech Republic to the United States and looked like maybe 8 or 9 years old and didn't speak any English for a couple of years, and they just throw her into school. And I find this behavior to just be ridiculous. I mean, for kids to just move to another school in their city is traumatic. To move to another country and to not speak the language, I mean, what's the wisdom behind that? I'm sure they think, well, you just got to immerse the people into the language. Okay, to learn English, but what about the emotional trauma of being 8 years old and sitting in a class, or 15 for that matter, and sitting in a class, looking around, you don't understand anything that's happening. People are looking at you like you're a weirdo, like who is this person? And the teacher has to deal with you. I mean, does any teacher want to have
a kid in the class that they can't communicate with. I mean,
so hard.
What is the wisdom behind it? It's just so stupid, so dumb. And I have talked with so many clients about this issue, whether it's this kind of scenario or it's a private school scenario, like a boarding school scenario. So many people have a lifetime of trauma to work through when these things happen. And we just think of it like, well, this is what you do, Hey, 16 years old, send them to school.
Full immersion.
Yeah, that's what, what other option do we have? Well, send them to school. Well, boarding school, that'll be great for kids. They love that. It'll be a good chance for them to get to know other people, this sort of thing. And people just, and even when they hear about horrific things are happening, well, kids are kids, things happen, because we have this weird thing in our society, and I think societies all over the world, of just like, stuff happens when you're young, you'll get over it. But that's because most people have a few negative experiences and they do get over it. And in their small pea-sized brain, they can't imagine that maybe your experience growing up isn't the only way that people experience growing up,
I have a theory, dude. I have a theory that a lot of the world's problems, in all joking aside, a lot of the world's problems are triggered because the people in charge at the oligarchy level, at the very powerful levels, a lot of those were raised by boarding schools.
Oh, yeah.
And not by loving parents.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not necessarily boarding schools, but like this goes all the way back to when John Bowlby, the founder of attachment theory, he came from a rich family, and he was raised by, governesses,
tutors,
nannies, and went to boarding school. And the nannies would sort of come in and out of his life. And one of the biggest traumatic experiences of his life was when, I can't remember the exact detail, but he was young, like 5 years old-ish, and one of his nannies was fired or moved on in life or something, and he was completely devastated by that, because we consider high class to be nanny life. High class is boarding school. High class means, as a parent, you don't have to get down on the ground and take care of the kids.
Right.
Not only, these high power, CEOs and stuff, but the royal family in Britain, they have a long tradition of doing this to kids. You watch The Crown, and they depict this pretty well, of Charles and all the other kids of Queen Elizabeth. They are, barely seen and not heard as children. And because the Queen and King, they got stuff to do. They don't have time to play with children during the day. 100% agree. I mean, obviously not everyone, but it is a rampant problem. And ironically, if you're super poor and you can't get a job, you're at home with your kids all day. And guess who develops well? Those kinds of kids. Yeah. So you're playing with a rubber band, like right in the camera, like the way that Matthew McConaughey plays with that booger when he's in the Lincoln car. People that probably don't know what I'm talking about. It was very interesting. I was just like, is he trying to send me a message like I'm but a rubber band or something? All right, Berto, what's the final word?
Well, I think that there's two things that come to mind. One is your circumstances when you are a child can trigger things like pooping in parking lots. It can trigger you having very bad experience because you got moved to a school where you don't speak the language. But if you can try to, in all that darkness, try to find something you love and try to do a lot of that, then you will probably be giving better to the world than it gave you. And that's kind of the best thing we can hope for.
Beautiful. All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle, in which we answer your patron emails. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.